Inside the Pile on a Midwest college football podcast, joined as always by Clinton Boring. My name is Ryan Satkoviak. As we are unexpectedly wrapping up our fall preview series tonight, we got a twofer coming for you guys tonight. You will not get both of these episodes at the same time, but we had some more scheduling complications, so we're shooting our last two tonight. It's going to be a marathon of an evening for Clinton and myself, but not for the gentleman who joins us first this evening, Mr. Anthony Broome from the Wolverine of the On3 Network, talking the defending national champion Michigan Wolverines. And as we were just talking offline before the show, the very first repeat guest in the history of Inside the Pylon. A huge honor. If we had stickers, Anthony, I would send you one, but unfortunately we're not that bougie yet. I do have my hoodie on today, though. I got this made just because I don't know what to do with myself, and it's Nike, and I like Nike. Anthony, how are you doing this evening?
I'm great. Thank you for having me. It's an honor to have that two-time guest bestowed upon me. Now, the only thing I'd ask is that I would have to be the first three-time guest when the time comes. So on.
Well, I gotta say, I think Michigan probably has the most compelling early season matchup among Big Ten teams. So we're certainly teed up for that to be the case. This will be less confusing than the last time Anthony was on. Any Michigan fans who are joining us for the first time this evening, Anthony popped on. I think it was at the end of May. We did an episode with him and Tony Gerdeman from Buckeye Huddle as we just talked about the history of the Michigan-Ohio State rivalry, some of their favorite memories from their time on the beat, as well as kind of how this, both programs' mentalities have shifted as the rivalry has kind of turned on its head the last 3 years. But for me, it was quite complicated having to go Anthony, Tony, trying not to mix that up. It was a couple of weeks ago when we had Ryan Herrings from Locked On Badgers on. Every time Clinton said Ryan, both our ears perked up. It was chaotic. So I'm happy that we don't have to deal with that this evening because my brain is already mashed potatoes, and it'll probably be mashed potatoes here when we shoot Penn State in about an hour. So this will be fun. Clinton, how are you doing? Are you ready for this marathon we got going on here?
I'm ready to do it, man. Kids got to bed pretty smoothly, so that was step one in the direction. Also, Anthony, since you last joined us, my wife got me an Inside the Pylon flag for my birthday. So that was pretty legit. I also have a shirt. I don't have it on tonight, but I am repping the Welcome to the Jungle because the Bengals are back. Joe Burrow's back. We survived preseason game one without Burrow getting hurt, and that's the most important thing at this point. But no, I'm excited to talk about Michigan. There's too much to talk about 2023, damn it. I'm ready to talk 2024. I want to know what's going on with this team. I want to know what to expect from this team. We'll get into the schedule some with you. It's a really fun schedule. The teams you guys get to play this year is awesome, especially with the new additions. So I'm ready to do this. I'm ready to get rolling.
And listen, I guess the way that we're trending, maybe the next time we have you on, we will have stickers because apparently we're just making merchandise for ourselves at this point. We're going live on YouTube for both of these tonight. I think this should be a pretty entertaining evening for it. So you can catch us there. Subscribe to that YouTube channel so you can get notified whenever we do go live 3 times a week once the season starts here in a couple of weeks at ITPCFB. That is the same place you can find us on Twitter and Instagram. Make sure you're following the shows on the social so you can interact with us there. If you would rather listen to the show in the morning, you can find us in your podcast feed, Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your shows. We are at Inside the Pylon there. I feel kind of like a fraud saying this because I've said this probably for every episode, but there's so much to be excited about in the Big Ten this season for a multitude of reasons. And, that's kind of getting into the whole nitty-gritty conversation of what kind of college football fan are you? What are you like? But I'm super fascinated by this Michigan team this year because I don't know what to expect. I feel like and maybe this is wrong because we just watched Iowa go 10-2 in a season where they literally did not have a functional offense. So anything is possible with the defense that Michigan has, but given the unknowns on the offensive side of the ball, I don't know what the ceiling or the floor for this team is. Well, I have an idea of what the ceiling is. I could see this team once again being legitimately good and a playoff team, but as far as the floor, I have no idea, Anthony. So we're just going to dig into question one here. And in kind of you're going through spring ball and now these first couple of weeks of fall camp, just what have been your early impressions of Sherrone Moore now that he has ascended into that full-time head coach role? We saw what he can do in that role last year from a game day standpoint, beating Penn State, beating Ohio State. These are not bad teams he was beating last year. He came in with the heat turned up to 11, and he acquitted himself very, very well. But now he has that big office, and he's tasked with, hey, this is on me. I can't sit here and say, well, I'm going to throw everything at the kitchen sink because I'm just kind of the stand-in guy. Ultimately now the buck stops with him. How have the Wolverines gone about carrying the momentum through the way last season ended?
I think Joel Klatt put it the best during the spring game broadcast that Fox did, where he said, everything is different, but everything is the same. Like in almost all of these leadership roles, there's a new face there, new head coach. Sherrone moves up to head coach, new offensive coordinator, new defensive coordinator. Jesse Minter goes with Jim Harbaugh to the NFL. So there's a lot of newness on the coaching staff. Obviously, the big storyline, at least from a national perspective, is a look at all the guys that Michigan lost. Michigan would argue, look at all the guys that we are elevating into bigger roles. We think we're still talented there. As far as Sherrone goes, I think every step of the way, I've been pretty impressed by. He's a guy who acts with, I think, a lot of conviction is the word I keep using. I think, there were some coaching staff decisions that needed to be made pretty quickly. Again, a lot of people thought that Sherrone Moore was going to be the continuity hire that would kind of just take the baton from Jim Harbaugh and you go into this next era of the program. But he's had to put a lot more of his own fingerprints on this thing than we thought, because Minter goes with Harbaugh. Mike Elston, the defensive line coach, goes with Harbaugh. Steve Klinkscale, defensive backs coach, goes with Jim Harbaugh. So, had to flip the entire defensive coaching staff. You're navigating, obviously, the storylines with, the NCAA and what comes with all of that. I don't know that's been a huge part of his, the last few months for him. But, it's different being an offense or being a head coach from an offensive coordinator. Like, you're shaking hands with donors. You're going to, athletic department events. You're fundraising. You're recruiting. You kind of get to see the program from an all-encompassing view. And it just seems like every time we've talked to him, just feels like a little more comfortable in his role there. It was a lot right off the bat. I mean, 17 days after winning a national title, you're the head coach, and you have to replace guys on the staff. You've got to, some of the staff members, one of the staff hires resigned because of a DUI arrest right before the start of spring ball. You had Denard Robinson, who resigned because of an alcohol-related incident while driving as well. So just in all of that, it's a long-winded way of saying that every time that there's been something that's come up, I think he's acted decisively. I think he's acted quickly, and I think he's acted like a head coach. I mean, so much of the job is what we see for those 3 hours on Saturday, which we've seen some pretty good things from him, in the 4 games that he's coached now. But operationally, I think I've been impressed by. Doesn't really feel like a program that's being run by a first-year guy. It does feel similar, but obviously it is different.
Too, and if we're talking mentors for him, he obviously had the benefit of learning from one of the greatest football coaches of all time, not just at the college level, but I mean, I don't remember if we talked about this on the last time we had you on, but if you're looking at the list of guys who have won a college football national title and then coached in a Super Bowl, you can count it on one hand. And to have that guy as your mentor, and not just a guy who's had that kind of success in coaching in general, but a guy who's done it his own way. He's not a guy, Jim Harbaugh's not a guy who's followed any sort of playbook, who's followed hey, this is how you have to do it. He's blazed his own trail, and, he's certainly made enemies along the way, but just by being himself. So I feel like if you're learning from anybody, that's about as good of a mentor as you can have in the big office.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Jim Harbaugh is one of one. And I think right off the bat, everyone has said, like Sherrone Moore said, I should say, I'm not Jim Harbaugh. I'm my own guy. I think there are probably tentpole things within the program that I do not see changing, because, I mean, Sherrone Moore, that's the other thing too. It's not like he was a coordinator hire within the last year or two. Like, he was here in 2018. He was here for, Ohio State game in 2018, and the Ohio State game in 2019, and the COVID season. And he's kind of been one of this program's key lieutenants through a lot of good times. Obviously, the last few years, some turbulent times on the field, some turbulent times with stuff off the field. Again, it's just there's no better there's no better lesson that can be taught than seeing how it's done at the highest level for whatever it was, 6 years. So yeah, I mean, it's so tough to predict that. Like, it's so tough to predict what this next however many years looks like. But to me, this feels a lot more like a, Bo Schembechler handing off to was Gary Mueller, but then Lloyd Carr for several years. Like this feels like a pretty natural succession plan. And again, the last 3 years were high points in program history. One of the oldest programs in college football, the winningest program in college football history. It doesn't get really much better than what they experienced the last 3 years. So there's going to be a bit of a natural come down from that. I think that a lot of Michigan fans are kind of not bracing themselves. I think there's just an understanding and an awareness of that. But yeah, like I said, I mean, a lot of faces look different, but a lot is the same too, including a lot of the players that are on the roster. So I think this has a chance to be a really good first year jumping off point that a lot of first year head coaches don't have.
So my kind of piece for Sherrone was we know what the talk has been, especially in Columbus, Ryan Day taking a CEO approach. Now that Sherrone is head coach, have we seen him, or how much have we seen his hand in the O-line room, or how much do we expect his hand to be in the offensive play calling when we come into this season?
I'm not sure about the play calling yet. I think that's something that they're sort of working through. I mean, I think that they are totally comfortable if Kirk Campbell, who's also the quarterback's coach, is the sole play caller. But it's funny that this came up because we talked to Sherrone more, early today, Tuesday, as we're sitting here recording this, and someone asked about the offensive line, and he more or less said, like, as long as I'm the head coach here, we will continue to emphasize that, and we're going to be really good there. And I think, despite the fact that they've lost a lot of those guys from last year, I think that it's really important to more that, remember the things that got you there too. Like it's been the offensive line, it's been the run game, it's been, quarterback that doesn't make mistakes but can make plays when they need to within the system that they run. So again, I just think that operationally, and certainly offensively. Now, here's the one thing offensively I could see happening is that certainly whether Sherrone is involved in play calling or not, I do think they're going to be a little more aggressive. I think that what they do is probably going to look a little more like what they ran in the Rose Bowl, where you're seeing a lot of pre-snap motion. You're seeing a lot of, the jet sweep type of stuff. You're seeing misdirections. I think that they feel like they have the athletes to do that. I think they want to push the ball down the field a little bit more too. But, and of course, every new coaching staff says they're going to be aggressive, right? We're going to be aggressive. We're going to be aggressive. We're going to be aggressive. But I think that fundamentally it has to change a little bit because Jim Harbaugh teams were precise. They were on the details. And they were going to come right at you. And I'm not saying that Sherrone Moore's can't be that, but I think you're going to see a little more tailoring to the personnel that they have in as opposed to, well, this is what we are. This is what we're going to be. I think that they really want to stay multiple in what they do, really on both sides of the ball.
Before we talk about the staff on the defensive side of the ball, we'll skip ahead to question 3 and make it question 2. And I just want to ask you about what you make of this quarterback competition so far. It seems like there's been smoke in a bunch of different directions, but it seems at least Alex Orji and Jack Tuttle are the two names that have been coming up the most. Is that where we're at? How do you see this playing out? Is it going to be one guy or the other? Is it going to be a package of both? Or is there just some weird scenario that they're just kind of holding their cards close to their vest that they're going to surprise us with when they take on Fresno State here in a couple weeks?
Yeah, there's no doubt in my mind that, when it comes to Jack Tuttle, because we'll start with him, comes back for a 7th year. And by virtue of just sliding everyone up the depth chart from last year, like Jack Tuttle was J.J. McCarthy's backup. And I think something that's probably held him back from at least the early stages of this competition is that he was banged up in the spring with a shoulder. It sounds like that shoulder issue has kept him off the field a bit in fall camp as well. So it's been Orji getting a lot of those reps. It's been Davis Warren as well. I think if you were to do a camp superlatives through the first week and a half, maybe 2 weeks of camp, we had players tell us that he was probably the best passer of anyone in camp to this point. And a guy who obviously spent a lot of time in this system and was a backup to McCarthy as well in 2022. But, there's a lot of different things said and a lot of things that just kind of come from different sources and who says what. But I still kind of think we're looking at Alex Orji being the guy for that job. I think Michigan's pretty comfortable with, if it is a Jack Tuttle or a Davis Warren, they still think Alex Orji is one of their best 11 offensive players. So they're going to find ways to get him on the field. I think the key with him is going to be, they don't need him to be J.J. McCarthy. Now, if he became J.J. McCarthy, holy crap, Michigan's winning a national title again, right? But I think with what he brings is more of a dual threat skill set, I should say. Thickly built, looks like a linebacker or a running back. I think that QB run game is going to be a bigger part of what they do if he's the guy, regardless if he's the starter or if he's coming in a platoon role. But, you need him to throw the ball accurately and adequately enough to where if you can get a defender to just freeze for a second with the ball in Alex Orji's hand, wondering what he's going to do, it makes them a lot more difficult to defend, obviously. So I get a little concerned when people say, well, what's the downside of this guy? It's like, oh, well, we just need to completely teach him how to play quarterback. I get things like that because that's like, and again, I know he's tearing it up in the NFL at the moment, but I also covered Joe Milton, right? Like he was the potential tools guy. And there were a lot of people like, oh, he's the next Cam Newton. And they had one good game at Minnesota in front of a bunch of cardboard cutouts.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden he was, we never saw that again. And Tennessee did some good things with him. But, when you do the pros cons list, and one of the cons is, well, we don't know if he can actually play quarterback or not. That is a little concerning to me. Especially when the other two options are a seventh-year guy who has never really been a starter anywhere, and a guy who, it's not his fault. Davis Warren was fighting cancer his junior year of high school. His senior year of high school is wiped out due to COVID, so he's a walk-on at Michigan. But maybe could have been a scholarship guy if things played out differently. But still a guy that doesn't have a lot of experience. So when that's what's up against, we don't know if this guy can actually throw the football effectively. That does scare me a little bit because, as fun and as old school as running the ball 32 straight times to close out the Penn State game last year was, that ain't going to get it done when Texas comes to town in week 2, or when USC's in town 2 weeks after that, and when Oregon comes to town. So not every team you play is going to have Drew Aller at quarterback. So
this is so funny seeing the quote tweets on those Milton highlights from last week, because it was all like, you could tell who's never watched the Tennessee game. The quote tweets were always just like, none of these guys have ever watched a Tennessee Volunteers football game if they think that this guy is any good. It was just kind of comical to me. But and that's part of what makes Michigan so fascinating to me this year, is because there's unquestionably a lot good back about this team, and we're talking about a team that has made 3 straight playoffs without needing dynamic quarterback play, right? We're looking 3 years ago to Cade McNamara, more your prototypical, stereotypical game manager type guy who can make good throws for you and can go out and lead a game-winning drive, but he's not a guy that you're going to go out and ask you to win a game. And for as toolsy as J.J. McCarthy is, and obviously, you don't be a high first-round pick in the NFL draft if you don't have the it factor, those physical tools. He's a guy that they kind of just seemingly said, you know what, when we need you to make a play, go out and make a play, but we're not going to ask you to do that because we don't need to, because we can rely on our defense to give us good field position. We can rely on our running game and our offensive line. And it worked last year because up until you play Penn State late in the season, there just wasn't a lot threatening on that schedule. And boy, right out the gate this year, you hit the nail on the head right there. Just this schedule is, I don't know if it's as murderer's row as it looked when it came out last year, when USC was still a top 10 team before they completely fell apart, and then before Washington's entire program decided to leave Seattle in the offseason. But you're still playing arguably the 2 quote-unquote favorites in the Big Ten this year, plus a team in Texas that's bringing a ton back coming off a playoff appearance. And it almost feels like, you can get by being Michigan and still probably win 9 games without getting a ton from the quarterback position. But I don't know how much more than that against some of these better teams on the schedule you're going to get without having a guy back there who can at least make a couple of throws per game.
And that's the key to all of it. I mean, you look at J.J. McCarthy's stats from last year, and I know it doesn't jump off the page, especially that's all we heard about in the lead up to the NFL draft was the stats. But, when you look at what his bread and butter was, J.J. McCarthy was, elite in kind of those gotta have it situations, those 3rd and 6s, 3rd and 7s, 3rd and 8s. I think that what Michigan was able to do with him was kind of retrofit this improvisational. I'm not comparing him to the guy, but like Patrick Mahomes-esque, Josh Allen-esque skill set, and put him into this system where you need him to make crazy athletic things happen at times. But also don't be reckless. Don't turn over the football. And I think that's going to be, I think it's not crazy for me to envision whoever starts at quarterback for this team having better quote unquote stats that McCarthy had last year. But man, in those 3rd and longs, in those moments where you needed a guy to play a little bit of a playground football, him and Roman Wilson were amazing at that. Who are those guys going to be? Who's going to be the guys that you put the ball in those gotta have it situations? Because I think, and this is no shade towards Cade McNamara, but I think you saw very clearly what the difference was between what it looked like under him and what it looked like under McCarthy, and just that much more that you need from a playmaking perspective at quarterback. And it was, I don't know how tangible of an amount it was, but that's the difference between game managing your way to, a 10-win season, 9-win season, or actually getting into this 12-team playoff, making some noise, and maybe having a bit of a title defense for at least a couple weeks, right? Like Michigan doesn't need to be the 1 seed. In fact, I think you could probably get away with being, we've talked about this a few times in our podcast, the 5 seed might be what you want in moving forward. We don't need to break all those scenarios down, but to me, I think they can get enough to get there this year. It's just they had enough to get there with Cade McNamara, but when they needed to, stand toe to toe with someone that belonged on the field with them, they needed just a little bit more at quarterback. And I don't know if that's there this year, but it's going to make or break, what we actually see them as.
Well, you mentioned obviously quarterback play is going to be important. And before we kind of move to trenches and defense, what do they have on the outside to help out whichever quarterback wins this job? We obviously all know about Colston Loveland. I'm a big fan of his. I think he's going to be tight end 1 in this draft. I'm going to be heavily targeting him in 3 weeks, Ryan, when we have our college fantasy football draft, as I had him last year, and I didn't – very solid, but I cut him before he really started picking up on the season. Anyways, what do they have kind of on the outside at wide receiver that we can look for?
Yeah, it's interesting because it kind of feels like – and I say this lovingly, like this is not as an insult, but it feels like a Rich Rod sort of wide receiver room. You've got 3 or 4 guys under 6 feet tall that are, you're going to need a guy that's 5'10" to play the X sometimes. You're going to need a guy that's 5'8", 5'9" to block his ass off, which is kind of, that's another skill set in its own right. So at wide receiver, I like what they have there, though. Tyler Morris was a guy that was a high school teammate of J.J. McCarthy. And then, since he's been on campus, he's kind of just been a sure-handed guy with a little bit of juice that runs good routes, that, holds onto the football. I think he's going to slide into that, Ronnie Bell, Roman Wilson type of role pretty seamlessly. I think it's going to start clicking for him here this junior year. Samaj Morgan was a guy last year that sort of a bit of a gadget player. They used him in the screen game. They used him a bit as a rusher. We saw him as a returner late in the year. But he's a guy that, he's from around here. So I've seen him play a couple high school games. And back in high school, he played every single position on the field like he was 6'5" and carried himself like he's a 6'5" sort of alpha male type of player. So, he can go up and get the football. He can, catch a back shoulder fade down the field. I think that's what his first career touchdown was last year. I think it was in either the Rutgers or the Indiana game. But I think, they're looking for more out of him this year. Frederick Moore is a guy that, as a sophomore, has been one of the bigger risers of the offseason. Just, in terms of every time they talk wide receivers, like he's right in there in that group of three. And, he got a lot of extra work in. I saw him in the spring running routes for J.J. McCarthy before Pro Day, like a guy that is just taking every single rep he can, and he's trying to get on the field. From there, it's a couple lotto tickets. They had to hit the transfer portal for some help at wide receiver. Amorian Walker, who actually was recruited to Michigan as a wide receiver, they switched him to corner last year, and then he hit the portal after the season, went to Ole Miss, then in the most, 2024 NIL era thing ever, comes back to Michigan after spring ball. He's playing wide out. He's a lotto ticket in that, he's 6'3", 6'4", kind of a tall, lankier guy, but a bit of a project. He could be sort of that guy that can take a top off the defense on the outside. But again, kind of similar to Alex Orji, needing to, he has all these traits, but does he know how to play the position they have him at? That's going to be a big key for him. And they also brought in CJ Charleston, veteran guy from Youngstown State, probably more of a wide receiver 5 type for them. But it's the room is different because you've had Roman Wilson, Cornelius Johnson catching a lot of passes over the last 3 years. But I think that when you look at, position groups of with question marks in it, I don't know that I have the wide receivers very high outside of depth. That's a room where all it takes is a tweaked hamstring for a walk-on to be on the field, right? So we'll see what happens there. But kind of like what they have on offense everywhere except, the most important position on the field.
Well, that's a good segue to we'll call this question 3A because we kind of combined the trenches into one question here. But how do you envision this offensive line shaking out? This feels like kind of one of those litmus tests almost on who actually pays attention to college football, because I see a lot of lists that have Michigan as a top 10 offensive line, despite the fact that I think they're replacing their top 7 linemen from last year, which feels like a lot of projection. It feels like projection that's earned, given they've been one of the best outfits over the last half a decade. But also replacing 5 guys, 7 guys, however you want to phrase it, is a tall order. Like that's a lot of inexperience coming into the lineup. But at the same time, maybe you can make the argument that, well, you're replacing the whole room, so everyone has to get on the same page. So maybe it's better for chemistry that nobody was on this, getting playing time last year, and they're all getting caught up at the same time. How do you see kind of that line shaking out across it? And is it unreasonable to expect that it could once again be one of the best units in the nation?
I think without question can still be that. The Michigan offensive line has kind of become in the same mold as like how we think of Alabama cornerbacks, Ohio State wide receivers. Like they might lose guys, but there's always going to be something there. Michigan has the unique scenario where, yes, you lose the Zach Sinters, the Trevor Keegans of the world, all of those guys that were kind of core pieces of that group. But you look at what this group of 5 could be. Their potential starting center is going to be a guy that will have been here 4 years. It's either Greg Crippen or Raheem Anderson. Josh Preeb, one of the guards they brought in from Northwestern, he's an all Big Ten caliber guy. Miles Hinton did some good things on film last year before getting injured. Giovanni El Hadi, I think it was Sinter or someone had gotten hurt a couple of years ago, and El Hadi had to step in and play a few games at guard, and he looked pretty good. Looked like a guy that could have started games for them last year. But when you just have these guys come back and run it back, it's more like an extra year of seasoning. But the offensive line, I think it's fair to have concerns about it. I think at both tackle spots, that's probably where I have the biggest concern. I think they're going to be pretty strong up the middle. From my perspective, I think that, it's one of those things where their position coach, Grant Newsome, is kind of right. He's been in Sherrone Moore's hip pocket for like 4 or 5 years, and was the tight ends coach last year, almost kind of on that similar trajectory. And we've heard that he's a shining star. And what we've heard in recent weeks is that, yeah, maybe it was a little bit herky jerky in spring ball. You have some guys banged up. It's just I don't know that spring much gets done in the trenches during spring football. To be honest with you, but fall camp. I mean, we've had a couple defenders come out last 2 days. Kenneth Grant being one of them, defensive tackle, saying like, "There's a couple days that the offense has been on our ass, and Wink Martindale has chewed us out." And I think that's what you want to hear. We know what Michigan has on defense. We're going to talk about them in a little bit, obviously, but when there's that push pull where you hear that, hey, you know what, starting offensive line, 5 new guys, but they put Mason Graham on his rear end yesterday, or they did a really good job sealing off those edges. Like, you want to hear the 50-50 battles are going each way in camp, because I think that makes everyone else better. But I don't really have, again, it might just be classic Michigan homerism. I don't know. But the offensive line, I think it's just a matter of, Miles Hinton to me is the key to everything at left tackle. If he doesn't play well there, that could kind of send off a chain reaction of things that could go bad for the offensive line. But I like the pieces there. It's, again, just so many guys at this point, almost like over-seasoned. It's like leaving a guy in baseball who's hitting like 330 in AAA just because you don't really have room for him. I could see some similarities there. I think they like what they have here a lot.
I'll say one thing they certainly won't lack, even outside of experience, is size. I was reading a 24/7 article today, and they said the starting 5, at least that they're projecting, they average 6'5.4" and an average weight of 318.8 pounds. Those, as to quote the great Keith Jackson, those are some hog mollies. Those are some big, big boys up front. And you also just brought up the phenomenal duo. And Ryan, I'm sorry, I know you love Notre Dame and your defensive tackle duo.
Listen, man, I will not argue this point at all.
Graham and Grant are the best defensive tackle duo in this country. I don't care what SEC, ACC, Big 12 person wants to argue with me, or Ohio State person. I'll take it to the grave. Graham and Grant, best defensive tackle duo in the country. But who are some other names to know, especially coming off the edge? Maybe who's behind those two guys? God forbid. We know, let's say Michigan's making the run in the playoff this year. Depth's going to be so key. Who are the guys behind those guys that we need to get to know?
Yeah, I mean, you have known commodities in Graham and Grant, which is crazy to say. Like, it takes defensive tackles a lot longer than 1 year, 2 years to burst onto the scene, and now going into their junior season. I mean, the idea that this could still be their best year yet is that's the tip of the spear, right? That's where everything starts for Michigan. If you get that push in the pocket, it's the chain reaction everywhere else is a big deal. In the edge spots, you got a couple guys in Derek Moore, who is, I think, a top 100 recruit, has played in the rotation. They'll rotate 4 guys. They've traditionally done that. Derek Moore's been a part of that. I think he and Josiah Stewart, you're looking at being those top 2 edge guys. Combined, they had about 5 sacks apiece last year, and they were just kind of bit guys. So looking for a little bit more out of them. I think they're going to play a little more because just the depth at edge is not exactly where they're used to it being, but still some quality guys there. TJ Guy, another one of those guys similar to the offensive line, where probably could have gotten on the field 2 years ago, but you've got Braden McGregor in front of you. You got Jalen Harrell in front of you. There's just the opportunities were a bit limited, so he's ready to break out. I think we could be looking at one of the better, you talk about how you build things up the middle with the defensive tackles. I think you might have one of the best linebacker duos in the country this year at Michigan, with Ernest Hausman, Jayshawn Barham, who transfers in from Maryland, and kind of he's a matchup piece. You could line him up at edge. He can drop back into coverage. He can sit in the middle of the field, do what you need him to do. Both of those guys, I think, will kind of step in for Junior Colson and Mike Barrett and just kind of be what Michigan linebackers have been the last few years. Secondary, Will Johnson, best cornerback in college football. We know that, again, he's an All-American guy. He's probably a top 10 pick next year. Rod Moore tears his ACL or has some sort of knee injury during spring ball. Keon Saab goes to Alabama. So Michigan brings in, I think, two or three guys at safety. It was 2 guys at safety. They brought in Wes Walker, who went to Tennessee, transferred to Louisville, and then to Michigan after spring ball. Jaden Mangum from Michigan State, which is interesting. He's a little wrecking ball out there as well. And then that'll fill out the safety rotation with Quentin Johnson, who's back for his 6th year. Bakari Page is back for a 5th year. So you'll have a battle, probably that number 2 cornerback job with Jair Hill. Amir Hall's an Albany transfer that's played pretty well, but it seems like Jair Hill and Will Johnson will be their starting corners. It's crazy to say. I mean, they lose so many foundational guys off last year's team. But again, so much of that talent is right there. Like maybe a little bit more top heavy. Probably the key to all of it is who steps in for Mikey Sanders still at nickel. Zeke Berry looks like that guy right now. Jaden McBurrows has gotten some reps there, but I think they feel pretty set in the back end just in terms of probably who their starters will be. But again, a lot of battle for depth, and you're going to play a lot of guys at some point. So cultivating that is critical.
Going a question for here, just talking about overall scheme in general, is they've done a really good job of, as one defensive coordinator leaves, bringing in another guy who runs the exact same scheme the last couple of years. You've mentioned Wink Martindale a couple times, but how's he adjusted to kind of coming in and coaching the college game? Because I feel like the NFL to college DC can go really one of two ways. Either they are phenomenal at it or it completely bombs out. And there's and maybe there is an in between, and I just am not thinking of a guy off the top of my head. But it seems like at least my own personal experience of watching Notre Dame football, you're either Al Golden and you're incredible, or you're Brian Van Gorder and you spend Saturdays wishing that he would do something more with Jalen Smith instead of waste 3 years of his college career.
Wink, I think so far, and again, a lot of it is maybe the new car smell, so to speak, the honeymoon phase, but it seems like a guy who's like genuinely, it's not like he was chased out of the NFL. Like he resigned his post because he fell out with Brian Dable, and this opportunity came about. Michigan could make him the highest paid defensive coordinator in college football, and bing, bang, boom, there you go. It's tailor-made for you. But it doesn't seem like a guy that just took the money because it was his only option. You know, again, he's probably going to be back in the NFL at some point. I feel like I'm having a little bit of Jim Harbaugh deja vu in that regard. But yeah, I think when you have a first-year head coach who is more or less kind of an offensive guru, to bring in a veteran guy, one of the most veteran guys that you could bring in, a guy who's been an NFL assistant for 20 years, who's coordinated some really good defenses, and things didn't go well with the Giants last year, and 1 year changes the whole narrative on you, right? Michigan wanted to keep the meat and potatoes of that defensive system intact. Now, what Wink Martindale brings, and some Michigan fans sort of kind of cringe when they hear this, but runs a little more man. He blitzes a little more. The first thing they think of is when you hear man coverage, blitzing more,
Don Brown.
they think of Don Brown. They think of 2018 Ohio State. They think of 2019 Ohio State.
Crossing routes galore.
Exactly. The old engage 8 every single play. But, Wink is, I don't think it's any disrespect to Don Brown, but he's heard those narratives and he's kind of pushed back against it. And, again, it's the guy that comes from the NFL. Like, you can't not be adaptable in the NFL. Every week is, you're going to play the Lions 1 week and Dan Campbell's going to want to run the ball down your throat, or you could play Sean McVay and it's the passing game and the play actions. I think you want a guy, especially, it's an interesting subplot with this schedule. You think about the big games that they have and they'll rotate through pretty quickly. Kind of does feel like a pro, schedule feel to it. So I think to have a guy like Wink who, listen, he's just like not really going to recruit. Like he'll be able to closer on the recruiting trail, like when the guys come on campus to visit. But I think when it comes to gravitas, when it comes to, again, another guy close with the Harbaughs, that's another reason all of this still feels the same, because they're always there. They're omnipresent. The Harbaugh family is. It feels like, I think people wanted to be blown away with a name, but and this is, a huge name. And Wink Martindale's one of the best defensive minds in all of football. But I think the overwhelming reaction to when he was hired was, yeah, that makes sense. Baltimore Ravens, mentor to mentor in McDonald. Yeah, that makes sense.
I want to kind of wrap up the football portion of this discussion with our question 5 is just how on earth do we gauge expectations for this season? This feels a lot like one of those situations where when you factor in everything, just, what was lost from a coaching staff standpoint, what was lost from a roster standpoint, how the schedule is just miles different than what it was last year. It feels like this is a situation where this Michigan team could still be pretty damn good this year. And the record doesn't necessarily reflect that because, well, maybe you lose a close game in week 2 to Texas because you're still trying to figure your quarterback position out. Maybe you lose a close game the first week in November to Oregon because they're going to be one of the best teams in college football. Maybe you drop a game in the middle of the season to USC because, Lincoln Riley's an offensive genius and he's got Miller Moss who throws for 6 touchdowns in the Holiday Bowl and he's coaching for potentially his job this year because the people in LA who don't care about football are actually getting feisty about the USC program. How do you kind of go about looking at what a successful season is for Michigan this year? Because it feels like to me that it's a team that could very feasibly go 9-3, but it still feels like a damn good team and like a team that maybe just misses the playoffs, but definitely a team that if they happen to sneak in is not one that you would want to have to play in that first round.
Yeah, and the crazy thing is and maybe this is hedging, maybe this is sort of me saying what my expectation is without actually saying it, but if this team goes 9-3, I think they can still get in with the schedule that they have. They take care of business enough. I think from an expectations perspective, this has the chance to be a very, very good football team. And if any of these quarterbacks are as good as the coaching staff thinks they can be, then they're expecting to win the Big Ten. They're expecting to get to the college football playoff. And given that a lot of these guys have been there, they expect to win a national title, and they've seen what that looks like now. For me, I think, going from Harbaugh to Sherrone, at the same time that conference expands, playoff expands, it just feels like the closing of a chapter of college football in general to another. I think when you look at, what should Michigan football be? It's the question you can ask, that Ward Manuel or whoever's the athletic director in 2025 or 2028, who knows? Whoever asked the program, what are they going to be? We're a team that needs to get into the 12-team playoff. We need to win the playoff games that we host. I think the expectation is kind of for them, is it a good season? Did we win the Big Ten? Did we get to the college football playoff? And if the nice thing for them, they can get to one of those goals without reaching the other, which is, I think, that's where you can kind of sell the week-to-week mentality. I do wonder, does the pressure come off a little bit week to week for some of these teams? So to me, it's win 9 games, win 10 games, get in that 12-team playoff. And I think most importantly, listen, a bounce of the football here or there, they could be 8-4, or they could be 10-2, they could be 11-1. But what is it like? What does the product look like? Does this look like it's something that is sustainable? Was Harbaugh just sprinkling magic pixie dust on this program? I think seeing that everything runs smoothly and that there's not that steep of a fall off, because really when you look at the roster that they have, there should be a steep fall off. I think those are the biggest things I'll be looking at this year.
Yeah, I'm excited. The big guy I want to see is I've had him. He's been in college for 3 years. I've had him 2 years in college fantasy. Donovan Edwards. That's the guy. He's taken over a full backfield this year. I'm going to come hunting for him in that draft too. So I need a big year out of Big Don here. I need him to take over and do what he does in the national championship every game.
The good news for him is that his best games, the national title game is kind of an outlier in this regard. His best games have always been the one where he's gotten volume of touches. Good. And he's going to have a lot more of it this year, obviously without Blake Corum there. I still think their backfield is like a 1A, 1B situation where you want to talk about a guy to target. Khalil Mullings is kind of sort of stepping in that Hassan Haskins type of role. I think is something to keep an eye on for a lot of people. So Edwards, I think, is bound for a huge year. I think that his best games have come when he does get 15 carries, 20 carries, what have you. So we'll see what happens. But he's got to. He's on the cover of that game.
Got to live up to it.
All right, Anthony. The fun bonus question is back. So we hit you with this, and Ryan, you were incorrect. It was not the end of May. It was on my birthday that we did that Ohio State Michigan episode, June 3rd.
Well, it was close enough.
Very close. We asked you about best pizza on and around Michigan's campus. General answer was Joe. So I'm coming back with you for something different since you're our second-time guest. Just what is your favorite pizza that you've had in Michigan? The name of a place that you've had.
Ooh, okay. Well, there's a couple. I consider myself a bit of a connoisseur.
There we go.
Nice.
The Detroit style pizza. The best place to go is Louis in Hazel Park.
Okay.
You can't go wrong with Buddy's either. Buddy's is everywhere. Like Brooklyn style, New York style. Freddie the Pizza Man in Martindale is my go-to there. And just regular traditional slice. There's a place. Not to shout out this, no free ads, of course, but shout out.
Not a sponsor,
Carl's.
could be.
Shout out to Carl's in Taylor. Carl's Pizza.
Okay.
Carl with a K. You make a good pie. So those would be my picks.
Nice. Excellent.
That's
Appreciate that.
that's pretty close to my aunt. Next time I'm over there, I'm gonna have to find that one.
All right.
We had,
Not that I visit my aunt ever, but next time, the first time I visit my aunt, then that'll happen.
We were in South Haven last summer, and one of my wife's friends had said Silver Beach Pizza, or the pizza that's right on Silver Beach in South Haven, was the best pizza they've ever had. I think her husband grew up in Michigan, so we went over and tried them. They were pretty solid. I have not found the gold mine of pizza from Michigan in my just limited 2 experiences of traveling there, other than Joe's. So we got them on the list. I'm excited to try them, and appreciate the input on the pizza.
Always.
Before we let you get out of here for this evening, Anthony, just let the listeners know where they can find you and what you are working on here over the next 2.5 weeks heading into the start of the football season here at the end of the month.
Absolutely. You can find me over at thewolverine.com. We're on the On3 network of team sites. Just really to ramp up through fall camp into the season now. As we sit here today, we're a little more than 2 weeks out. I'm so fired up for that. We've got, I think, one of the hardest working teams, in college sports media. So it's a pleasure to get back in the trenches and do all that stuff. So find me at thewolverine.com. If anyone who's watching out there in YouTube land, if you use the promo code UM1, you get 2 months of access to our site for only $1. So Buckeyes, we're used to cleaning you out of there. We'll take your money too when the time comes. So.
Listen, usually you got to pay double for that kind of action, Cotton. Well, Anthony, we once again appreciate you making another hour for us this evening. Our first repeat guest in Inside the Pylon history. It's an honor to have you back. Next time you find yourself free in Ann Arbor on a Friday afternoon or a Monday, let me know that first slice of Joe's is on me, sir.
Oh, right. I'll take you up on that. Be careful.
All right.
But thank you for having me. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Absolutely,
guys.
man. Thank you for joining us.
If you are finding us on YouTube, we will be back here in about 10 minutes. If you're in the podcast feed, we will be back in your feed on Thursday morning for the last installment of our fall preview series, Talking Penn State. Thanks, everyone, for joining us, and we'll see you soon.